Hello, 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 and welcome back to DLA Alternative. It's your boy Brennan, and I hope everyone is doing phenomenal as always. And thank you to each and every single one of you who keep subscribing, liking, and following this journey with us. But yes, as you can tell by the title of this theory, the Who's Watching Will theory, okay, this is an interesting one, and this is a connection to our Dr. Owens theories part 1 and part 2. So if you have not checked those ones out, go check those ones out. They get very interesting. We got some interesting connections. All right. And the only thing I'm going to hint at towards those theories is that I am getting vibes that Sam Owens, Dr. Sam Owens, our boy, I'm getting huge vibes that this man is involved with some spy agency or at least secretly working undercover within Hawkins' lab, at least to maybe out Hawkins' lab in a certain way. And yes, we do find out in season 4 that Owens has involvement with Dr. Brenner, and we know this, and we don't really know how. But the thing about that is sometimes undercover spies go undercover for quite a long time if they are really, really trying to secretly out something, all right? Especially something like Hawkins' lab, if you ask me. But with that being said, if you didn't check out those theories, go check those ones out. In part 1, we talked about Will's appointment, kind of analyzing Sam Owens. And then in part 2, we analyzed the conversation between Hopper, Joyce, and Owens when they had that private conversation in his office. But in this one, okay, this one's going to connect in a certain way. And like I told you in those theories, that we are going to talk about this mysterious stare down that Owens and Hopper end up having right in the end of this scene, okay? But yes, I want everyone to jump to that scene, and I hope you guys like this one. It's going to get very interesting, and there are some interesting connections to something right here that I'm going to ask you, all right? So let's get on with this one. All right, so this scene kicks off, people, and it kicks off with Hopper, Joyce, and Will, and they're about to leave Will's appointment at Hawkins' lab, all right? They're walking into the parking lot to the cars. And as the scene starts, okay, do we see Joyce, and she's pissed, and she's basically saying, trust me, why would he even say that to me? And I don't want to talk too much about part 2, but in that theory and how that theory ended, okay, we ended that conversation right with what Owen says to her at the very end of that, and he basically says a Brenner line. He basically looks at her, he says, I'm on your side, and then he goes, I need you to trust me. And we know that as a Brenner line, people. He says it to Karen and he says it to people, all right? We know that for a fact. But the thing about that is that kind of shows a little bit of a hint that Owens and Brenner might have involvement without us even knowing it as fans and viewers. But as this conversation continues, okay, this is when we get a little bit interesting here. And I'm going to pop a big connection on you right here. But basically, Hopper jumps in, all right? And he basically tries to defend Owens here a little bit, all right? Which is very interesting, okay? And he basically says to her that this guy, any degree that you can think of, this guy's got it. But what I found interesting here, okay, how he says this and how Hopper kind of just knows this, all right? If we connect something to season 1, a big thing to season 1 in Hopper's character, what we see in Hopper's character in season 1 at a certain point in time is that he gets real involved with trying to research the truth, or should I say investigate the truth. And we have some theories based off that, so go check those ones out. But the thing about that is, okay, now connect the fact that Hopper has connection to researching or investigating certain things, okay? So now, with that being said, all right, he knows a little bit about Owens, and we don't really know that they have a connection. We just know that there's this secret little thing that they have going, and we really don't even figure this out until after this. But at the end of season 1, okay, we have that mysterious scene where Hopper ends up walking into that car with these random men, and we don't know anything about it, all right? But now that we jump to season 2, we end up finding out that Hopper's involved with this secret arrangement trying to keep things quiet and calm, okay? So in my opinion, no doubt in my mind, those people at the end of season 1 have to have some involvement maybe with Owens, okay? And that's why I'm kind of thinking in a way that Owens might be involved with someone else. He might be directly involved with Brenner, but in an undercover way where he is undercover trying to figure something out or trying to stop something from happening. And in my opinion, if he is involved with a spy agency or something like that, his job would be to let things happen so that they can learn about things and try and figure out the best way to stop something. And no doubt in my mind, people, we see hints of this in season 4 when Owens finally jumps the gun. He goes into his house, he pulls out that random stuff, and then he starts figuring out the Nina Project setup. And then that season, it jumps to Owens again, and he's there helping Eleven and leading her to the Nina Project to try and figure this all out, okay? And in part 2, like I said, I don't want to talk too much about it, but Owens says a line that connects to the Nina Project in that conversation with Hopper and Joyce in his office. So if you did not check that one out, go check that one out. There's a very interesting connection that connects directly to the Nina Project and what it is all about. But as Hopper says this line, okay, I started thinking a little bit deeper about this, people, about the connection of him researching and investigating for the truth. And then, like I said, we see that random little scene at the end of season 1, and then now he has this involvement with Owens in a random deal that we don't know anything about. Like I said, all we really figure out is that Hopper's supposed to keep things quiet, and then that Owens is supposed to keep shit out of his town. We figure this out later in the season. But the bigger picture is here, people, if you've already caught on, okay, what was the connection here? Okay, he's researching. So he might have researched something about Dr. Owens maybe in season 1 that we never saw, right? But there's a bigger connection here, people, and there's a bigger connection to a specific character that Hopper ends up investigating, and that's what we see about that in season 1. And who is that, people? Our girl Mama, okay? 11's mama being Terry Ives. So what I'm going to ask you, all right, is we don't see any connection to this at all, except at the very end of season 2, okay? For some reason, we see a very big connection to all of these characters. And what I mean with Dr. Owens, with Terry Ives, and with Jim Hopper. So with that being said, do you guys think that Terry Ives and Dr. Owens know each other and have involvement one way or another being spies? Or should I say being spies undercover trying to out the truth of Hawkins' lab? Because in my opinion, people, this makes perfect sense to this story. And like I said, and like I've said in the Owens theories part 1 and part 2, that basically spies get in too deep sometimes, people. There's plenty of movies and shows and stuff about that. Where basically someone who's undercover, even if it's a police officer, okay, sometimes people who are undercover get a little bit too deep with what they are actually undercover for. They end up getting a little bit too involved, and I'm going to do a connection in this show, okay? Or maybe they move a little bit too quickly and then get lost in the darkness, kind of like our character Mama. And what connection do we see this with, people? We see that line connected to Brenner, who is also connected to the Nina Project and 11 at that time. That's their conversation. And that also connects us back to what I said in part 2 about how Owens discusses and says something that connects directly to what the Nina Project ends up being. So in my opinion, people, like I said, I'm getting major vibes that there is a major connection between Owens and Terry Ives. And I think Hopper's involvement with him researching and investigating Terry Ives in season 1, I truly think that could have led him on the journey to figuring out more about Terry Ives necessarily, and maybe her involvement with other things that we did not see. And maybe that led him on the journey to figuring out who Owens is, or at least the organization Owens was involved with. But the bigger question is how, people, because it doesn't really make sense if Hopper just figured this out and then contacted him and then bada boom and then, okay, they're just connected and they're working together. It doesn't really work like that, people. So with that being said, an even bigger question, people, okay, there's a specific person, because we see Mama, all right? We see that she doesn't really talk, she can't really move, all right? And she's kind of lost in her mind, all right, in the void. But once again, if you've already caught on, people, all right, there's another character involved with all of that, a mysterious character that we don't know a lot about, that we get sus vibes from in both episodes of this show. Both major episodes that this character is involved with, and let me tell you, people, you guys already know who it is. Our girl, sus Aunt Becky, all right? So the bigger question is, people, is that how Owens and Hopper ended up getting connected to each other somehow? Did they get connected through Terry Ives and then possibly Aunt Becky at trying to actually help him? But the thing about that is also, is there's something more to figure out, because when we see Aunt Becky leave Hopper and Joyce, or at least they leave her, she basically says, I'm sorry I couldn't have been much of help. But logically, we never see if Hopper ever went back there to talk to her again. We never see anything like that. We never see a major involvement with Mama other than the few episodes she's in. All we see is that Hopper and Joyce meet this character in season 1, and we don't get a lot of answers about this at all, okay? And there's really not a lot of connection to what ends up happening in that season to that character. So it's really mysterious, right? But in season 2, all of a sudden, Eleven ends up finding Hopper's research, which leads her to Mama, okay? And that's the only time we really see that involvement of that character once again. So in my opinion, people, this kind of leaves room for us to see major connections to this character once again in season 5 with all of this. We should see the fact of why Hopper met with those men at the end of season 1. Maybe there's going to be an involvement with Mama to that and a connection to that, because that's this only other random connection we see involving Hopper specifically, okay? So the only thing that logically makes sense is that this character and then all of this randomness somehow has a connection. So let me know your thoughts. This is wild if you think about it. But as this conversation continues, okay, this random guy just walks right past them behind him, and then Hopper continues, okay, and he starts saying, okay, that PTSD stuff is real, all right? So once again, I don't want to talk about too much about part 2, but in that theory, we also connected the fact that Owens is just trying to convince these parents, okay? And I say parents, I'm going to include Hopper in that. But my major point is that in that theory, we talked about the fact that I think Owens is really just trying to convince Hopper, the one who's involved with him in this deal, okay? I truly don't think he was really trying to convince Joyce, maybe just try and keep her calm. But when he uses that anniversary effect reference, he uses the term and compares it with soldiers and PTSD. And we end up seeing in season 4 little more hints of this, that Hopper has some PTSD, and we kind of see that through this show involving his daughter. But in season 4, we end up seeing a bigger reason of why he has this animosity and why he feels guilty for all of this. And it's because of something he did involving Agent Orange when he was a soldier, okay? So there's all of these connections. But the fact that he says, and how I said in part 2, Owens, I really just truly think is trying to convince Hopper because he's the one on the outside trying to help with all of this, right? Now, Hopper says right here about that PTSD stuff, it's real, okay? He seems convinced to me, if you ask me, all right? So let me know your thoughts. But then we get another interesting connection. I don't know if this is necessarily the very first connection that we might have in this show, okay? And by all that, I mean a first Shadow origin story connection, okay? Because by what Hopper says right here, he asks Joyce, he goes, and how's Bob the Brain? And she basically kind of just laughs a little bit and then looks at him and says, don't call him that. And he looks at her, he kind of grins and he goes, sorry, it's just an old habit. So basically, people, this season was written probably well before that story was ever written, okay? But the thing about that is, and what I discussed in our memory theories, okay, parts 1 and part 2, go check those one out. Those ones are awesome. I love those. But in those theories, it's kicked off with the fact that we know that Hopper, Joyce, and Bob, all right, are involved with that origin story. And for some reason in this show, they don't remember any of this, okay? And like I said, the first Shadow origin story most likely was probably planned and written after this season was written, okay? But I will say there's a major connection to Kate, the writer, who's involved in that documentary with the first Shadow origin story, if you've checked it out, and also with this season. Okay, this is the season that Kate came in. So with all that being said, Kate, the writer, has a major connection to all of this, okay? So if she's the one who has involvement with that first Shadow origin story, she's definitely going to use the things that she included in this season, especially her first season working on the show, all the way back to this first Shadow origin story, if they chose her to be the main writer for that, all right? So just think about that. But with all that being said, in those memory theories, we talked about the fact that Hopper, Joyce, and Bob just don't remember their involvement, at least, in things about each other, okay? Specifically Bob and Joyce. Because there's a lot of scenes in this season, all right, that Bob just doesn't remember a lot from his childhood at all, except certain things. His nightmares and that he was sick all the time specifically. Those are two major things that I noticed. But the thing about that is we have proof that Bob doesn't know he was involved with anything that to do with any first Shadow origin or any monsters or supernatural life in Hawkins. Because later in the season, all right, when Will wakes up and Joyce and him are talking right before, he basically says straight up to Joyce, I cannot believe something like this would ever happen in Hawkins or to someone like you. So that is proof, people, that we should see in season 5 there's a reason why they don't remember this. In my opinion, the fact that they are involved with the first Shadow origin story, but there is no memory of this, or we see nothing about this Henry Creel at all in seasons 1 through 3, okay? But we have a connection to their past in this season, and there's a lot of connections to season 2 and 4 that we found out in those Owens theories, so go check those ones out. But the fact that they're showing proof that there are hints to their past, that they remember certain things, but the fact that they don't remember the bigger picture being the first Shadow origin, There's something fishy about this, people, and I think we are going to figure this out in season 5. I think we have to. It just logically just makes sense that we have to see a connection here some way or another. So let me know your thoughts about that as well. But as this scene comes to a close, people, all right, Hopper basically does what he's probably supposed to be doing on the outside, all right? And he basically tells Joyce, you call me first if anything happens. He even basically makes her copy because he says it twice to her. He's like, you call me. And we already know Joyce is most likely going to call Hopper. She went to him right away when Will went missing, obviously because he's a cop. Don't even tell me that in the comments. I know. But what I'm saying is since they had major involvement together in season 1, no doubt in my mind she's going to call him first. But Hopper's job is to probably make sure that Joyce stays calm, does not intervene, and probably just listens to whatever Owens is saying. And that's why I'm saying that Owens probably was there to convince Hopper more than Joyce in that conversation in part 2 of this theory. But with the scene coming to a close, all right, Joyce and Will end up getting in the car and they leave, and Hopper watches them leave, and then he goes to his car and he has a cigarette, okay? And then this is when we get to the famous stare down scene between Hoppers and Owens, where Hopper just does nothing and Owens kind of gives him a little wave. And then this lady walks up to Owens and says, okay, they're ready for you, sir. But as you could tell by the title of this theory, you might be a little confused up until this point, all right? And why it's called Who's Watching Will, all right? Because the bigger question here, people, is I don't know if Will necessarily is the one being watched. And that's the point of this theory. My question to you is Will the one actually being watched, or is Hopper and Joyce the ones being watched in this scene? And there's a reason I'm asking this, and I'm not meaning by Owens or this lady that ends up walking up, okay? If you caught the little hint I gave you without saying anything earlier in this video, okay, I mentioned the fact that this scene continues and then all of a sudden this random guy walks behind them and I didn't say anything, all right? But what I want you all to do is reverse this scene a little bit right to when it begins, okay? And pay attention to that man, okay? Because what we see this man do, all right, we see later in this season, all right, involving a specific episode called Will the Wise. And in that episode, which we will talk about involving Owens, Jonathan, and Nancy, okay, in that mysterious scene at the park and when they meet for the first time. We are going to talk about that in another theory, but we get a hint of something right in this scene, okay, all the way in this first episode of this season. Just pay close attention to that man as the scene goes on and take a look at what he does, people. As we see him on the left side of the screen, okay, as you're watching, he passes right behind Joyce and Hopper, right? And then pay attention to what he does right after that. As we see Nancy say to Jonathan in the scene that we will talk about in the next theory, she basically says, hey, look at that guy. He just talked into his jacket. So just take a look at that for me. And the question is who the hell is being watched and how many spies are there in this show, people? But with all that being said, I hope you guys liked this one. This was an interesting one. This was kind of halfway a Stranger Things secret in a way, if you've never caught that. And also something that kind of proves that there's more spies than we think. And the fact that we see all of this spy involvement, especially with a titled episode in this season being called The Spy. No doubt in my mind, there's more spy involvement than we think, not just involving the Mind Flayer and with Will and Vecna and all of this. More spy involvement involving major characters that probably aren't necessarily in this show too much. So let me know your thoughts, people. We will talk about this as always. And more importantly, keep subscribing, liking, following this journey. I really, really hope you guys like this one. This was an interesting little bit of a series with the Owens leading up to this point. But let me know your thoughts as always. And I love each and every single one of you. And more importantly, you guys already know, we out.